Okay guys, so here we are. This is a little document that I've put together for you guys to show you what I do for my quarantining process. It might not be considered by some of you the right way, but this is the way that I've done it since I set up my quarantine tank on my 65-gallon tank, and it's now been over a year now since I've been doing that. And this process has worked very well for me, and I have not seen any issues with my fish in the display tank since I started adopting this process. So firstly, let's take a look at why we quarantine. Well, there's a couple reasons why we do that. I think the primary reason to do that is to keep your display tank and its inhabitants healthy and protect them from any outside disease or infection. It allows you to monitor your new inhabitants before they go into your display tank. Gives you a chance to get to know their feeding habits, and almost to a certain degree their personalities, whether they're going to be shy, if they're going to potentially be aggressive tank mates. It just allows you to get to know that fish to see how it might do with your other tank, with your display tank inhabitants. As I said earlier, it helps prevent the spread of disease. That's I think, you know, comes into the same category as, you know, keeps your display tank inhabitants healthy. Another good reason is that once your fish are in that display tank, you're not going to be able to medicate your display tank, especially if you have corals and invertebrates in there, because most of those medications are not going to do them any favors and will most likely kill your ornamental corals and inverts and things like that. Snails, cleanup crew, hermits, you can say goodbye to a lot of those if you decide to start medicating in your reef tank. And again, as I said earlier, not only does it monitoring your inhabitants prepare them for the new display tank, but it helps you feed them up and get them healthy and eating what you feed your display tank to. Another great reason for doing a quarantine tank is that a quarantine tank can be very cheap and very easy to set up. Now, this will depend on several factors, but ultimately I don't believe that there's much of an excuse to not quarantine a tank because it's expensive. So we're going to look at the equipment that I use on my quarantine tank. This isn't necessarily what everybody should use. This is just what's worked for me. So a tank. I've used a 10-gallon and a 30-gallon, and in this instance, in the picture, you'll see my current quarantine tank. That is a 30-gallon tank. The size of your quarantine tank is really going to depend on a couple things. It's going to depend on the number of fish that you intend to quarantine at the same time and the size of those fish. A filter. This will depend largely on your budget. You can have a hang-on-the-back filter, a canister filter, or a sponge filter, or you could even do no filter at all and just do daily water changes. I don't recommend that though. And this will again depend on the size of your budget, the size of your tank, and the type of fish that you're keeping. In my case, have gone with a hang-on-the-back filter. A heater, that kind of goes without saying, unless you're in a a particular environment where it stays pretty warm all year round. UV sterilizer. I'm not actually using a UV sterilizer on this quarantine tank. However, some people will use a UV sterilizer on their quarantine tank, especially if it's a permanent quarantine tank. Water circulator or air stone. This is important to provide a current within the water and to oxygenate your water. PVC piping is a great tool to use to provide hiding places for your tank's inhabitants. Medications won't bind to it, nor will parasites such as ick. Test kits. Your main test kits here, I've put ammonia, nitrite, and nitrate, and copper, but really the main one that you need to worry about is going to be ammonia. If you're not going to get all of them, at least get an ammonia test kit, or at least a ammonia detection sticker that you can stick on your quarantine tank itself. I believe Seachem sell those. A secure lid or a top for your quarantine tank. The last thing you want to do is lose a fish because of it jumping out of your quarantine tank. And the other thing that you want to have on hand, which not many people really think about, is you want to have on hand RODI water for your top-off. Not a lot of tanks, as I mentioned previously, are going to have an auto top-off on their quarantine tank. So as I showed you, I keep a 5-gallon jug of fresh RODI water sitting underneath my tank, ready to top up whenever I need to. Medication, again, this is what I use. This isn't necessarily what everybody else is going to use, but this has worked well for me. I like Paragard. The reason being is because it's a broad spectrum medication. Well, what do I mean by that? What I mean is that it treats parasites, fungus, bacteria, and viruses. So it covers you on all 4 of those fronts pretty well. It's effective for 24 hours, meaning after 24 hours, it's no longer active in your water column. So if you do decide that you want to be 100% sure that it's completely gone, or you want to remove it before that 24-hour period, you can add carbon to your filter or into your tank, and that will remove it. I also like using Prezi Pro. It treats common flukes and flatworms. It's safe on nitrifying bacteria, and it can be used in fresh and saltwater tanks. Cupramine is my #1 go-to copper medication. There are a lot of good reasons to use this medication over other copper-based meds, but these are the reasons that I like using Cupramine. It's the most effective medication to treat ick with, in my experience. It's safe on nitrifying bacteria. It's less toxic to fish compared to other copper-based meds, and I could go on as to why that is the case, but I'm not going to. I will let you guys do your own research on that. Seachem is a great tool for that. Coprisorb will remove it completely, but this can be expensive, which is why I tend to use Cupramine as my very last treatment or medication that I treat my quarantine tank with. Cupramine cannot be completely removed through the use of carbon, unfortunately. Only Cupramine will do that for you. So, this is the process that my fish go through when they are in my quarantine tank. So week 1 is purely an observation week. That very first day that they are in my my quarantine tank, I just leave them with the lights off, no feeding. Day 2, they get their first feeding, and we continue that observation period for the remainder of the week. That's a good time to get to know your fish's eating habits, what it likes to eat, what it won't eat, and a good chance to figure out if your fish is going to be a difficult inhabitant or not, so far as eating wise. Come day 7, I'll do a 25 to 50% water change, and I will actually remove my carbon from my hang on the back filter at that time. So week 2, I start treating with Paragard. I do a 7-day treatment, and then I will do on the 6th or 7th day a water change, and then add carbon to completely remove Paragard completely, or 100%. And as I said, naturally expires after 24 hours. So the process of using 2 meds at once is not recommended at all. However, combining Cupramine and Prezi Pro is proven to be safe. Seachem will definitely say do not mix medications, and they will continue to officially say that with regards to Prezi Pro. However, there has not been one documented case that I'm found where there's been any ill effect on the tank inhabitants when mixing these 2 medications. So that's what I do for these guys for weeks 3 and 4. It's a 14-day treatment of both meds, and on the 8th day, the first day of the 2nd week, I do a 50% water change, and then I reapply or I top up those meds. So week 5 is the very last week that they're in quarantine, and I'll do a 50% water change after that, at the end of that Cuprosorb, and at the end of that Cupramine and Prezi Pro treatment. I will add carbon. If I have Cuprosorb, I will add it, but in all honesty, it's expensive, and I don't really have that readily available to me that often. But I do have a copper test kit available, so doing my water changes I can keep an eye on that copper level. And again, make sure that, you know, day 2 you repeat that process with doing a water change and test for copper as well. And then for the remaining period of those days, you want to just observe your fish. So that is basically my process for treating fish within my quarantine tank, providing there is no other ailments discovered during that process. Day 7, they get released into the display tank. So I hope that was helpful to you guys. Questions, comments, much appreciated, and I will see you again soon for the next update.